Hello, my dear friends. How lovely it is to see you and to have you share with me in this reflection on Luke's Gospel, chapter 14, verses 1 to 14. And for those of you who are going to church on Sunday, you'll hear, you most likely will hear just verse 1 and then verse 7 to 14. So the second half of what I'm going to reflect on today. But I'm reflecting on all 14 verses of the chapter today. So I hope that is helpful for you as you come and listen, and I encourage you to read the passage in its entirety. And here Jesus is come into the house of a Pharisee, and Jesus it's in a setting that on the surface seems ordinary, but comes on a stage of allows Jesus a stage of profound teaching about the kingdom of God. He's at the meal of a house of a prominent Pharisee, and the religious leaders are watching him closely. And Jesus, as he so often does, turns this moment into a revelation of God's heart. And that's what I love about the Gospels, they all reveal God's heart. And it's such a beautiful heart. It's a kind, loving, caring heart. And so Jesus heals, he tells parables, and he redefines what is great, not as the world sees it, but as God sees it. And this passage speaks directly to our lives today. It speaks of the wonderful promises of God that are not limited to the powerful or the wealthy or the outwardly successful, but are extended to all who will receive God's grace. And it reminds us that by walking by faith and not by sight means trusting God's purposes, even when our lives feel complicated or uncertain, or in my case, just a little bit messy. But in the kingdom of God, hope does not depend on circumstances, but on the faithfulness of God. Alleluia. That's fantastic. So in the first 6 verses, the passage begins with Jesus entering the house of a leader of the Pharisees on the Sabbath. And immediately, Luke notes, they were watching him closely. There was a suspicion, scrutiny, even hostility in the air. And this is going to be normal for Jesus now. And it's normal for anyone in the church who seeks to be an agent of change and transformation. Those of the old guard are going to always seek to find out something that they can trip you up with, or that they can charge you with, or they can accuse you with. And right there in front of him is a man suffering from the dropsy, a severe swelling due to fluid retention. This placement seems deliberate, almost as if they had set the man there to test him. But Jesus, of course, knowing their hearts, asks them a piercing question. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? And the religious leaders remain silent. So then Jesus heals the man and then sends him on his way. But the heart of this moment is clear. God's compassion is not bound by human rules or social expectations. God is not limited by what others think is possible or proper. Jesus reveals a God who sees suffering and then responds not with rules, not with conditions, but with mercy. And the promise here is profound. No matter our condition, no matter what suffering any of us might be going through, no matter whether others dismiss us or overlook us, God sees us. God does not wait for a convenient time to act. God's love breaks into the present moment, forcefully, compassionately, and beautifully. So this is a word of hope to each of us when life feels overwhelming, when complications press in on us and people around us either cannot understand what we're going through or don't want to understand what we're going through, or simply just tut at us. But we can be sure of this. God sees us, God cares for us, and God acts out of love towards us. Walking by faith and not by sight, then, begins right here. Sight tells each of us, your suffering defines you. But faith says, God's mercy defines you. Sight says, the situation is hopeless. Just give up, go away, resign, run away, go and live a simpler life. But faith says, God can work even here. After the healing, Jesus turns his attention to the guests at the meal, and he notices how they're jockeying for places of honour at the table. This is human nature, isn't it? We live in a world that values status, appearance, success and recognition. Alison and I have been watching The Gilded Age just recently. It's a beautiful, beautiful series, but it's all about high society in New York in the late 1800s and how people jockey for position and status in that society. Because we're trained to seek the best seat, to prove ourselves, to secure our worth by comparison with others. But Jesus tells them a parable. When you're invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honour. But when you're invited, go and sit down at the lowest place. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. That's in verses 8 to 11. By the way, those of you who have seen The Gilded Age, boy, do we see that. People who exalt themselves end up being humbled, and people who are humbled are actually exalted in the series. It's really quite extraordinary. But here, Jesus is not simply giving advice on social etiquette. He is describing the way that God's kingdom works. In the kingdom, it's not about climbing to the top. It's about humbling yourself before God and trusting God and God alone to lift each of us up. And so here's another promise of God. Our worth does not depend on worldly recognition. God themselves will exalt the humble, those who feel unseen, unimportant or forgotten. The triune God promises to honour each of us. This is a tremendous source of hope. In times of difficulty, when life feels unfair, or when it seems that others are celebrated while we ourselves are left behind, God reminds us, I see you and I know you, and guess what? I will lift you up. So walking by faith and not by sight means believing this promise. Sight says you need to prove yourself, but faith says your worth is secure in God. Sight says you're overlooked. Faith says God will exalt you in due time. Finally, Jesus turns to the host and says something even more radical. He tells him, when you give a lunch or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your sisters or brothers or relatives or rich neighbours in case they may invite you in return, and then you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame and the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you, for it will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. And this is the heart of the kingdom of God. The world invites the rich, the powerful, and those who can give something back. But God's invitation is for those who can offer nothing in return. And here's the most wonderful promises of all. In God's kingdom, all are welcome. Status does not matter. Wealth does not matter. Achievement does not matter. God's love is poured out, especially for those who feel unworthy or excluded or forgotten. And this is where the good news becomes personal. Perhaps right now you're walking through a complicated time. I certainly am. Alison certainly is. Perhaps life has not turned out as you expect. Perhaps you feel that others have judged you or dismissed you or failed to see your worth. But Jesus says to us in this section, you are invited to the table. You're invited to my table. You are welcome in my kingdom. You are precious to me. This is the hope that we cling to. This is the good news that we have. The resurrection promise is not only about life after death, but it's also about God's faithful assurance that what seems lost will be restored. The broken will be healed. The lowly will be lifted up. Those who seem to have no place will find their place in God's eternal feast. And so walking by faith and not by sight means believing this even when circumstances scream otherwise. Sight says, you're forgotten. Faith says, you're God's beloved guest. Sight says, you have no future. Faith says, your invitation is secure at the resurrection of the righteous. Throughout this passage, then, Jesus calls us to reimagine what is real. The Pharisees saw rules, appearances, and status. Jesus saw mercy, humility, and God's extravagant welcome. In each of our own lives, walking by faith and not by sight means learning to see as Jesus sees. It means trusting that God is at work even when we cannot see it. It means holding on to hope even when circumstances look grim. The Apostle Paul says in 2 Corinthians 5:7, we walk by faith and not by sight. Sight focuses on the visible, the struggles, the setbacks, the judgments of others. Faith, on the other hand, looks to the invisible, the promises of God, the eternal hope, the assurance of His presence in each of our lives. For each of us, as we walk through complications and challenges, this passage is a reminder. God's promises are bigger than appearances. God is using our journey not only for our own life, but for God's own purposes in the lives of others whom we will encounter in due course. Our faith, our perseverance, our trust in God, these will become a testimony that will in time bring hope to others. So what is this message of hope? Well, it's hope for the suffering. God sees, God heals, and God restores. It's hope for the humble. God will lift each of us up in God's own time. It's about hope for the overlooked. Each of us are invited to God's eternal feast at the right time. Hope for all people. God's promises are not limited by status, wealth, or human approval. This is why we can keep walking forward even when life feels uncertain. God's promises are sure, dear friends. His kingdom is unshakable. His love never fails. Verses 1 to 14 of Luke 14 is more than a lesson in table manners. It's a vision of the kingdom of God, where mercy triumphs over rules, humility is honoured above pride, and the least are given the place of honour at the feast of the resurrection. For us, it's a word of deep hope. No matter our status, our struggle, our circumstances, God has a place for each and every one of us. God is inviting each of us to trust God, to walk by faith and not by sight, to live with the assurance that God's purposes will be fulfilled in our lives. So today, my dear friends, whatever complications you face, can I encourage you to hold on to this? You are seen by God, you are loved by God, you are lifted up by God, and each of us are invited to God's eternal banquet. So can I encourage each and every one of us, and encouraging you, encouraging myself, to walk by faith, for the one who has promised us is faithful. The Lord be with you.